really useful, and I think it actually went really well. I was just concerned about using up your time.
No,
I forgot you were the next person here. Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
No, you take
Start
off.
off.
What? We got. I think we got it.
Can I steal this? What did you get?
Sweet.
Thanks, boss.
I can do HTML.
This is VGA.
I know, but I
Oh,
can,
but you
convert
can
it.
only do it.
Why do analog conversions when you're
Well,
not to, man? I'm a digital boy.
This shows you the the thingy.
Oh, so that's okay, sure. I'll do.
Yep.
So you may not have sign-in sheets.
That would be bad. Why would I not have sign-in sheets? Because we're splitting the session and nobody organized it.
Okay, I got you. I got you, Dan. Let me see these.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate it, Tim.
I'll take these over to the registration desk.
I tried to keep up with all the bumpers on the mics, but
I was trying to get a picture of you and
What? He's fast. I'm furious.
So I don't know if you're in the Jabber for OpenPGP.
I'm not right now.
The Meetecho people have said they'd like people to keep using the deep drive Jabber room in the session because then it's all.
Okay. Well, I see Werner connected already, so.
Yeah. So they did post in the OpenPGP Jabber room, but I
Okay.
keep an
I'll
eye on
announce
both,
it.
So.
Well, you can keep an eye on both, or you're asking me to keep an eye on both.
No, I will.
Okay.
If I get somebody else to do Jabber scribe, you need to tell them as well.
So the Jabber scribe needs to stay in both channels.
Yes.
Okay.
We're supposed to sit down and talk about running keys. That's what the schedule. Okay. I sent out your fees.
Thank you very much.
I'll take my mess. Good luck, sir.
Thanks. Okay, folks, this is going to be OpenPGP working group. If you're here for OpenPGP, please, why don't you come up towards the front rows? If you're not here for OpenPGP, why don't you get out so you can have a conversation that doesn't interrupt our conversation? Not trying to send people away. We're happy to have people, but extra conversations in a room like this are difficult. So, Niels, are you? Niels is note-taking. So I need someone to be a Jabber scribe, and the Jabber scribe role is going to be slightly more complicated here. So can I get somebody to volunteer for it, and then I'll tell you why it's complicated? Or should I tell you why it's complicated first? Thank you, Rich. The complication is that, if possible, you could monitor the deprive Jabber channel as well as the OpenPGP Jabber channel because of the Meetecho confusion here. So if you find somebody who wants to try to connect via Meetecho and they're in the OpenPGP room, can suggest that they go to the Jabber, the deprive Meetecho. Yeah, so we have a relatively short meeting today, I think. There's a little bit of progress to report on, and hopefully we can get some discussion going about some of the remaining issues. We have a few people participating via Meetecho as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. This is the note well. You've probably already seen it. If you haven't already seen it, you should read it. It tells you what your obligations are by being part of the IETF. The agenda is relatively short. Hopefully, if people have other suggestions, I'm happy to add them to it. I want to point out the RFC 4880 BIS that Werner Koch has produced. I want to see, we're going to look at that. There's a bit of terminology review that Rich Salz and Robin Wilton did, and I want to ask other people to maybe think about that as well. Questions about S2K, we had some discussion and some agreement, but we haven't had much progress on it. One more bit of resolution about the fingerprint question and the online authenticated encryption bits. Anyone have anything else they wanted to add to the agenda? Okay, so on the 4880 BIS, we have a draft from Werner Koch. The draft basically starts from 4880 and has been so far incorporating existing extensions that have already been agreed into that. So sort of assembling it into one more modern piece. Who here has looked at this version 2 of the 4880 BIS that Werner posted? Okay, not too many. All right, so I can do a quick review of what the changes have been. So far, they've included Derek Atkins' proposed notations for device-specific OpenPGP certificates. It's incorporated the Camellia draft. It's incorporated the ECDSA and ECDH, and then it's also included the EDDSA work that had been drafted by Werner and a separate ID. So those are the main changes right now. You can see up here we have a GitLab repository that has the revision history for this. Werner has his own Git repository, which this is going to be a mirror of. I'm happy to, if people want to do pull requests or if people want to review it and make changes and they want to do it in GitLab, I'm happy to I'm happy to mirror the pull requests over to Werner to make sure that he sees them and has them available. The discussion should, as usual, take place on the mailing list, but this is one place that you can record things if you want them to go as a sort of issue tracker. So there's issues and tickets and pull requests and things like that there. So if you're interested in a particular subset of what's going on in OpenPGP, I want to encourage you to clone that Git repo. It's markdown text. The thing you're probably interested in is called middle.mkd, which is the middle of the draft. Go ahead, read it, comment on it, maybe make patches and send patches either to the list or as a pull request. If people have issues with working with this kind of document, please let me know. I'd be happy to help you to streamline workflow. Anyone have any other concerns about the next steps on the 4880 BIS? One question, I guess, is whether we should adopt this in the working group, which this seems to be the only candidate that we have for 4880 BIS, which seems like it would make sense to adopt it as a working group document. But given that almost nobody in the room has read it yet, and given that there haven't been any radical changes in it yet, I don't know whether that makes sense. Maybe folks with more IETF process can fill in the gaps here. Does it make sense to say we're adopting this and then just going ahead and?
From Derek Atkins, when should we expect the integration of the EDDSA ID?
The integration of EDDSA is in this version 02. So in terms of when can we expect it, it's last week, I think. But it only covers EDDSA with the 25519. It doesn't have anything for 448 at the moment.
Steve, bro, just in terms of adopting it, I mean, I guess once the author is happy to hand over to the working group, then the working group can adopt it anytime. So if that is the case, which you assume it is, then you could just call for adoption on the list and off you go. Okay.
So Werner, if you're hearing this, you should. I'm happy to talk with you more about what that means.
So the quickest thing to do is, of the people that read it here, also ask them if there's any dissent, get to the microphone, make sure he's willing to give change control, and then off we go.
I missed the first. Yeah. So it would be really great if we could get some people to just look over the specific changes. If you're into reading revision history instead of trying to reread the whole thing, if you've read all of OpenPGP, if you've read 4880 before, this really is 4880 with some changes, with some integration. There's nothing radically different there, but I encourage you to just skim the change history, see what you think of it, and give feedback on the list. Okay. So Rich and Robin Wilton did some review of the terminology in the draft, and have provided some comments off list. So I want to thank them first off for doing that. And I want to also encourage people to do this kind of review and do it on list where possible, because I think we could, there's a question here about how much of the terminology. Rich, I think, actually had a point saying that the terminology that's used in the OpenPGP draft is not exact. It's like OpenPGP terminology, but it doesn't necessarily line up with the same words that we use for similar concepts elsewhere. So we have an open question about whether we want to make 4880 bis aligned with 4880 terminology, or whether we want to have 4880 bis aligned with more widely used terminology. Rich, I don't know if you have a specific example or two of that you wanted to raise. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. There are things like, well, terms that aren't used. Yeah, Rich Sauls, Akamai. There are terms that aren't used, like wrapped keys, and talk about objects instead of like bulk encryption keys and things like that. So there's lots of, almost every term dates back to the original days. So those are the two that come to mind offhand. And the question is, do you want to help the OpenPGP community or the PGP, GPG, what is it, Basomatic community?
Basomatic.
Or align more with the bigger IETF security terminology. I'd be strongly in favor of doing that, but it's a kind of invasive change, although it's basically editorial. Failing that, then we really need a big terminology section at the beginning for those who aren't already a member of the party coming into this and trying to read the document.
One that maps the terms from what's used in the draft to the more common terms.
I think for the most part, they map reasonably clearly one-to-one. I think there will be some cases where obviously we're not going to change any of the data structures, but some of the other wording around things will have to change.
Yeah.
And that might be something to ask for a consensus on the group to do that or not do that.
Would you be willing to write a paragraph or two that is the translation paragraph? I'm not asking you to make the invasive change that involves going through the entire document and changing it, but even one that just lists, a handful of terms that you see that are being used differently, and say, hey, if we want people to be able to understand it coming from this terminology, here's the section that we need.
Sure. So I will write a list of the terms that I found unusual that I would want to translate. Yes.
Okay.
I will do that.
Great. Thank you.
Bullet list, not a paragraph, right?
Bullet list. Yes. That doesn't not just prose. Do other people have any particular concerns? People who are coming from the OpenPGP community or people who are outside of OpenPGP who are interested in picking it up? Any concerns one way or the other about the vocabulary choices? Okay, I'm taking that as a no. So S2K, we seem to have a consensus on the list that I didn't call for consensus, but we seem to have the sense that I got of the list was that people were fine with going with Argon, which was the outcome of the password hashing competition for the string to key comparisons. String to key is where OpenPGP converts user passwords into cryptographic keys. And there's a strong argument that we need something better than the traditional salted hashed password in today's era of password cracking supercomputers. And the password hashing competition has this Argon construct. And Argon 2i, I think in particular, is the one that we wanted to use. We had a pull request or a patch set coming from Nils Durner, I think, that described it. But Argon 2i also recently had a minor change introduced to try to address a new attack that was found post password hashing competition. So presumably we want to use the revised version. The revised version is not yet in this IRTF draft, so maybe once that draft is updated, then it's worth. I mean, maybe I guess we should refer to it anyway, and once the draft is updated, our reference will magically become the correct thing. Do we have any objections here to the use of Argon as a S2K? I didn't think there would be. But anyway, there is a particular draft. Hopefully we can get that pull request going. Werner, I'm not sure if you can hear me. I see that you're here on Meet Echo. But if you want to, prefix what you say on the Jabber room with Mike, then Rich will say it at the mic. But if you have any comments on whether, like, on that pull request or anything, that would be welcome as well. But I'm not hearing any concerns or objections about the S2K choices, so I'm going to move on. So we had a huge set of discussions the last time around, and then some follow-up on the list, although not a lot, that seemed to come around to the conclusion that we really only want one kind of fingerprint per key.
To back up one, Werner was away for a few minutes, and he's basically fine with the PR.
He's fine with the PR. Great. Okay. Thanks. So given that we want only one kind of fingerprint per key, the last question, so there will be a question of how we choose what that fingerprint is, but there's also a question of what do we put in the fingerprint. With existing keys, they are fingerprinted, including the creation timestamp, which means that the same key material can have multiple fingerprints depending on the chosen creation timestamp. So there's a question here of whether we want to do that if we're making a new fingerprint for these new keys. Are we interested in continuing to keep the creation timestamp present in that fingerprint? Or do we want the fingerprint to refer specifically to the underlying key? In some ways, this question is similar to the questions about key pinning that we see in the HTTPS world. So the HPKP, initially they were pinned by certificate, and as a result, the same key could be used in a different certificate, and the fingerprint of the certificate would change depending on the other metadata that was sort of garbled up with the public key. So I personally am leaning in the direction of not including creation timestamps if we're going to rev the fingerprint format. But I don't know. I don't have a sense of where other people stand on this. So I'm hoping that we can get some motion on this. I see Phil coming up to the mic.
Wilhelm Baker. I think it all depends upon what else you're going to end up doing. If we were in a world where people were going to take their PGP keys and roll them in some sort of blockchain-like log that would fix them in time, absolutely, and that would be a way of getting the timeout on a key, yes, I say that was a good thing. However, given where PGP is now, my experience recent experience of PGP was I tried somebody's code, it uploaded my key to a key server without asking me, and now people are sending me encrypted PGP mail to a key that I cannot delete. And so having a key that I cannot delete that doesn't even have a creation timestamp or an expiry sounds like a bad idea to me. So,
well, I don't think that's related to the fingerprint question, though, right? Because I mean, these can be uploaded regardless of the fingerprint form.
Well, yes, but the thing is that the lack of a timestamp means that instead of it being an attack that was bounded in time, it now becomes an infinite attack. I prefer. I mean, if people are going to, if people are creating timestamps over the keying material and if you're doing fingerprint over the keying material and the timestamp, I would expect that they would store the timestamp with the keying material and only generate another fingerprint with the updated timestamp if that was really exactly what they wanted to do. Otherwise, you end up with the context being separated from the key in ways that I don't I don't think is a good thing to do to your existing code base now, given that people have made assumptions on it. If this was an original decision, then if you were making this decision in 1992, then I think that it would be a good decision to make, possibly, but to change it now, I think would be bad.
Okay. Brian?
Yeah, Brian Ford, EPFL. So sorry, I'm not completely intimately familiar with the details of how things work now, but it seems like the meta question here is, should the fingerprint, depend only on the key or on additional self-signed stuff that the owner of the key can change if they want to without changing the key itself? And is that a good or a bad or an indifferent property? If that's a bad property, kind of having the fingerprint depend on other self-signed stuff, including creation timestamp, means that, an author, the holder of a current key could, mine for a different fingerprint for any number of different fingerprints they want to, while keeping the same private key. Is that a bad thing or a good thing? I don't know. Of course, anybody can still mine for different keys regardless, right? So I don't know if it makes a big difference. I'm just trying to kind of think about that. On the other hand, if we decide that it's not a bad thing for the owner of a key to be able to, pick different self-signed stuff and get different fingerprints, why should that allowance be restricted to this particular thing? For example, if we allow it to cover creation timestamp, could it also cover the Argon 2i parameter, security parameter, for example, or potentially other things that might be useful for the key holder to be able to tweak?
Well, so in this case, what it covers are things that the key holder cannot tweak, to be clear, because if you tweak them, then your fingerprint changes.
Well, yes, I'm saying, yeah, of course, the key holder can tweak it and get a new fingerprint,
Right.
But using the same key. So, and that's why I say, I'm not sure whether that's, that might not be a bad thing at all. As long as the fingerprint has to change when any of this stuff changes, probably I'm fine with that. And so I guess, in some sense, I'm saying I don't see a problem with, the fingerprinting covering the creation timestamp. And if nobody else sees a big problem with that, I would even go further to say, why can't it potentially we allow it to depend on other stuff too, like the Argon security parameter? This gets back to a suggestion somebody else made in the last IETF meeting, I think, that might be useful, that you could actually create a key fingerprint and choose your security parameter for it. If you want to invest a lot of compute cycles in generating this fingerprint, you get more protection against someone else mining a similar looking fingerprint, right? So I thought that was a nice idea. I didn't hear a whole lot of other support for it, but it seems to fall in the same general category.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. So any other feedback on that? This is something we'll need to take to the list, clearly.
Actually, on the mining thing, about the getting, one of the problems that caused, I looked upon, people have got Bitcoin addresses that have fancy strings, and so they try and get a key that has something cute at the front. And one of the security usability things that you then have is people who do that are effectively shooting themselves in the foot, because now all people look for is that the first few bytes, the characters say Facebook. Okay, so you've actually reduced your security of your key to anybody can now fake you. And so actually it might be an idea to have a mechanism to do the mining thing for the purpose of shortening the fingerprint. Because if you do the mining thing and you create, 2 to the 16 or 2 to the 32 or whatever fingerprints, looking for one that has all zeros at the front, then you could create a fingerprint that just drops those zeros out and either you have the same strength, you go for more strength in your fingerprint, or you go for a shorter fingerprint and fits on a business card, and you give people another way who want to do the mining thing, another advantage of doing the mining thing with that one that's going to shoot them in the foot.
Right. So you're saying that the only legitimate prefix to do mining for is a prefix of all zeros so that you can do truncation to have a shorter fingerprint effectively, which I think
No, not legitimate, but non-shooty footy.
Okay, fine. Non-shooty footy.
Yeah.
So one concern that I have with a variable length fingerprint is that it becomes difficult to tell whether you have a full fingerprint. So I've certainly seen situations where someone has a fingerprint on their business card and the printer screwed up and omitted several of the octets. And you can tell that it's not the full fingerprint because it's shorter than the fingerprint. If we allow for variable length fingerprints, it's impossible to detect that kind of screw up.
Right.
We could talk about checksumming or things like that, but now it starts to become very complicated.
Well, this is why in the mesh, what I did with UDF was I said, okay, I will always use SHA-512.
Yeah.
And you can trunk at any length, and it's valid. However, if you get somebody who gives you the first a 20 character pin fingerprint, then you look it up in the mesh, and then you get back the full 512 bit, and you store that in your contacts directory or whatever. And so effectively, you're only using the fingerprint in that point as a calling card and an initial validator, and it doesn't need to be as long.
Okay.
But you can have higher strength behind the scenes.
Brian Ford again, if there's time just to kind of throw out a variant of what Philip suggested, instead of say, using the number of zeros kind of thing. I think kind of what I was thinking about was what I think was suggested, say having incorporating Argon 2 into the fingerprint creation process with the parameter, for example, the strength parameter being the first digit of the actual fingerprint or something like that. And so it always produces the 256-bit thing, regardless of what that security parameter is. But if I'm a user who wants to invest more time into both the creation and checking of fingerprints, turn up the security parameter, I get more protection against other people trying to create similar fingerprints that look similar at the beginning, addressing the shooty footy kind of thing. I mean, people can still pick low security parameters and be shooty footy, but people also have the option of getting more protection. I think that was the attractive part of it.
If we have those parameters, then for a given key, it can have multiple fingerprints.
Yes, but
that means that if I have your key, I don't know what your fingerprint is.
So if we allow, getting back to this question, if we allow the fingerprint to cover anything but the bare private key itself, you have that property anyway. The owner of a key can, mine for different, produce different self-signed certificates with different creation timestamps, whatever, that will have different fingerprints. You have that. You're, unless you want to absolutely, go down to the bare minimalist thing where the fingerprint covers the private key or public key and nothing else, then you have that property. And that's where I'm saying, I'm not entirely sure whether that's a good or bad thing. It doesn't seem that bad to me.
So I could give you a key that tells you that in order to find out the fingerprint on this key, you need a gig of RAM and 30 seconds.
You could, yeah. And so that would make that key kind of a bitch to verify. Hopefully I only have to do it once when I import the key in my keychain, and I could decide just.
What if I don't have a gig of RAM? Then I just can't I can't use
Then
the key.
Yeah, then I say, I'm sorry, I can't verify your key. Yeah, that's a problem. And maybe there needs to be a limit to, or, you know, I don't know.
So
yeah,
I feel like we're having a bunch of discussions about all these kinds of things that we could do with fingerprints. And I think it would be really useful for someone to write down specifically what we expect fingerprints to do. What questions do we expect them to answer? And maybe that means you make a universe of things that you think we could use fingerprints for. And then you say, but actually, here's the narrow set that we're going to use fingerprints for in OpenPGP. So if I could get someone to write that and try with the goal of having a narrow scope of what the fingerprint can do, I think that would be a great thing, because we seem to be spinning our wheels on the fingerprint question. And I think if we have this idea that it could do all of these hundreds of things, well, it's going to take us forever. And maybe one thing to do is to say, what has a fingerprint traditionally done in OpenPGP? And do we have any reason to expand that use? And can we in any way like minimize it and say, here's exactly what we expect a fingerprint to do? Is there anybody who's willing to do that write-up? Phil?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have a lot of that text already. It's not published because I took it out of my draft to make my draft shorter.
So I'm not saying that this needs to be in the draft. I'm just saying like, So would you send that to the list and with a clearer sense of what you think fingerprints could be used for and what you think fingerprints should be used for?
Right. One of my big issues is I want to be able to use fingerprints in SSH as well, because at the moment SSH has some severe usability issues, particularly when you're using client-side keys. And I would like PGP and SSH to converge at some point. So I understand your issue about canonicalization.
Yeah.
And even there are ways you could get around canonicalization simply by saying, okay, if your leading octets are all zeros, then you have to use fingerprint compression. That could just be a. I mean, the thing
so
is,
again, it sounds to me like we keep adding things we could do with fingerprints, and I would really like us to be focused and say,
right,
here's what we could do fingerprint. Like, here's what we are going to do with fingerprints, and not have a wider range. Because I want this process to terminate. Does that make sense? Are you willing to write that with a goal of trying to say, here's a narrow set of things that we expect people to do with fingerprints? Okay, cool, thank you. So let's see. So we have this open question about symmetric encryption. I believe that Werner has stated a preference for OCB. Brian, you wrote a draft for AES-GCM. One of the guys from Whiteout did an implementation of the AES-GCM in, I think, OpenPGP.js. I spoke with Rogaway about the potential IP constraints for AES OCB, and he said he's fine making a grant. So OCB has there is a patent on it. The patent, I believe, is free for anyone who's doing free software. And for anyone who's doing non-free software, as long as they're non-military. And he has made a grant for the use of OCB in TLS and is willing to make a grant for the use of OCB in OpenPGP so that even proprietary military software could use it if they were using it in the case of OpenPGP. I don't know whether that fits under IETF IPR constraints. Other possibilities are Cha-Cha, and there's a bunch of other stuff coming out of the Caesar competition. Rich, here.
Yeah, Rich Solzak. I think actually he, through Aaron Zauner, he made a basic grant for any IETF spec.
I think the grant was for TLS.
No, he did one for TLS, but I think now he's cleared it up for any, but I could be wrong.
That would be great if you did.
The other issue is apparently the patents are invalid due to lack of payment, but some of the underlying ones may still cover issues, so it's still a mess.
I'm not an IPR lawyer. Yeah.
So Phil said lack of payment can be rectified after the fact. But he didn't say that the microphone, so I did. So Stephen Farrell, I think we shouldn't be, we don't negotiate kind of things here like that, but there is ongoing discussion on the CFRG list about OCB as well. So people are thinking about it, and the IP is a mess, or it seems to be causing messy thoughts in people.
Right. Do people have specific preferences for what we should be doing? I mean, the general sentiment that I've heard is we want one mode, one new mode that would replace CFB, that would be straightforward to use. I believe that Werner is interested in trying to do OCB, but I don't think we have any text for that yet.
Just before I go away, just to comment on the slide, the whole monoculture thing is just misleading and wrong, and Gutman's essay was just misleading. It's not that, so.
Okay, I wanted to put that out there. I'm happy to hear responses to it.
Joe Hall says, yeah, there are other IP claims on AES-OBC, things other than Rogueway, so yeah, it's all a mess. Rick Sauls, yeah, I think we clearly want, AEAD, kind of authenticated encryption. And I also agree with our AD that Gutman's essay is entertaining reading, but he also actually doesn't say it's wrong, right? So how do we get to this problem? And then it's not clear it's a problem when you read the whole thing. So yeah, I don't. One reason why I like AES GCM is it's fast in desktops.
Brian Ford, EPFL. Personally, I'm not particularly worried about the crypto monoculture, concern either. I think Cha-Cha 20 Poly 1305 is a great system. On the other hand, as a kind of backward compatible, well-known, kind of very well understood system that has really good hardware support out there, I think either AES GCM or AES OCB is a really good thing to have. Certainly, probably, maybe ideally just one, but would it be worth considering having, one AES-based cipher and a Cha-Cha or a DKB cipher, as kind of as two, providing at least some diversity, because there's at least a lot of diversity there for whoever is concerned with the monoculture thing, for example.
Alex Simelnikov as co-chair of CFRG. There is an ongoing discussion about AES GCM SIV variant, and which I'm not 100% sure yet. I don't want to commit to it, but it might be accepted as a CFRG document. So that might be just another data point for you.
So, hi, this is Sean Turner. I don't know if you want to do this, but what SBIME did back in the day when they had this whole DSA RSA thing was they said you could pick one of two sending and require two on the receiving side. So that might allow you to.
In terms of mandatory to implement.
Yeah, mandatory to implement. So on the sending side, you could choose one of two. There was two to choose from, one or the other. But on the receiving side, you had to support both.
Right. We're going to have a number of requirements that are asymmetric in that way.
Yeah, so I mean,
because we have this legacy to support, right?
But it also helps getting people ready for, if you believe in the whole idea of having separate suite agility, where you can change one. So if you get people like, okay, so we have to support two, great. And then when you want to clip one out, you can be like, now we're just changing one of the asymmetric bits.
Right.
Okay, cool.
Right. Makes sense. I'm wondering if there's anybody who would be willing to propose text for one of these as a patch to the RFC 4880 BIS. If anybody has any particular one that they want to see happen, or if Werner, if you have any plans to patch one of these into the spec. So Brian Ford is saying he can turn his GCM text into a patch if that would be useful. Yeah, I think that would be great. I think that would be a step in the right direction.
Just to say it on the mic, do it.
All right. I believe that covers what we had listed on the agenda here. Rich?
On the Jabber, Werner also says a patch would be good.
Patch would be good. Great. So we definitely didn't need the full hour and a half here because we haven't made very much progress since the last meeting. I'm hoping that we can improve that. But we have a couple of commitments for people to write some text and for some people to do some review. Are there specific things that people are interested in raising, or other topics people want to bring up?
From the Jabber, Derek Atkins promises to review the doc.
Great, thanks, Derek. And I will bring the document to the working group on the mailing list and to ask whether we, check in with Werner and see whether this is something that just going straight to working group adoption so that we know that we're working on this jointly, whether that makes sense. So I wanted to raise one additional question about the use of signatures and a pattern that I'm seeing within the broader IETF that we're not currently doing here, and just raise the question and ask people what they think about how it would work for OpenPGP. So the pattern that I'm seeing is that when there are asymmetric crypto signatures being done, or when there is an HMAC or an HKDF, the pattern is that you prefix the thing that you are macking or signing with a label so that your signature or your MAC isn't replayable in some other context. So that is to make it so that you can't trick somebody into making, say, an OpenPGP signature in one case and then replaying it as though it were a signature in a TLS handshake, or vice versa. Currently, OpenPGP does nothing that is that kind, that produces that kind of a prefix, as far as I can tell. None of our signatures are made over the data that's being signed. So I'm wondering whether people think that it would be worth, so this framework basically helps every system that adopts this kind of framework where you prefix the thing that you're signing is protected against cross-protocol attacks from every other system that also adopts the same rough framework. So the question that I have is, do we think that this is something that is worth applying in OpenPGP in this future revision, so that OpenPGP signatures can't be confused with signatures from other protocol schemes if the same keys end up being reused in some funny way? These are sort of theoretical attacks for the most part, but there's a sort of class of cross-protocol attack that it would be nice to say, we don't have to worry about this. I spoke with the folks in DNSSEC yesterday, and they seem like they might be convincible to make sure that new types of DNSSEC signatures have a prefix. TLS is already doing this. If this is something that we could say that we had a broader sense within the IETF that this was how one uses MACs or asymmetric signatures, that might be something, that might be a way to say, if you're using these newer protocols, you don't have to worry about cross-protocol attacks because we have this bulwark against it.
Brian Ford, I definitely strongly support that. So this came up recently in the CFRG discussion on, whether to include application-specific context strings or whatever or customizers into the, to the EDDSA signature, and that was decided positively in that case. I don't think it would be a bad thing for OpenPGP to have a similar mechanism, especially given the different types of semi-automated or automated applications that PGP signatures are used for. So you have git commit signatures versus different kinds of signatures. I don't know how important having that distinction is in practice in the bigger scheme, but it really seems like a good safety measure.
So for the EDDSA situation, can you describe the CFRG conclusion?
So I believe, so I actually proposed the scheme, and now I can't remember the specific bit twiddly details that I even proposed, but basically it was to allow the signing API to take an optional string of some kind representing the application specific context that could be empty for kind of backward compatibility or kind of no, when there's no context, but when there is a context, when you're producing signatures for this particular thing and you want to make sure they can't be mistaken for signatures for anything else, you have the application specify, well, we always use this context string, and that kind of differentiates the domain from anyone else. And it seems like it would be easy and just a good thing if PGP had a similar.
Great.
mechanism.
Does the CFRG EDDSA draft include that
I
context?
believe it does
string?
now, right?
It does?
Thank you.
Okay, great. So that makes it even easier to write this in. It may mean, though, that existing EDDSA keys that have been deployed that maybe don't use that context string, we're going to have to think about how we deal with that.
Yeah, it might have to be added as a PGP mechanism to make it work for all signing schemes. Yeah.
I was waiting for you to make your notes so you can listen again.
No, go ahead.
Okay, follow up is right there. So one thing we ran into, and I think I posted this to the list many months ago, so it might have been lost, is that signatures don't actually tell you an ID of the key. It has a unique ID number, but usually I cannot look it up. We were looking at publishing our keys in DNS using OpenPGP key, but there's no email address that I can put into the signature field anywhere that I can say this signature is made with a key that has this ID mapping to an email address.
The signature does actually have a which user ID made this. OpenPGP has a way to say this user ID made this signature.
But does that include the full? Is that just a user ID number, like the?
No, it's the full user ID, the UTF-8 string.
Okay, then I'll just say that.
Okay, I'm happy to look at that with you, see if we can figure out how to make that work.
I very much support the idea of putting in an identifier into the signature. That's actually what I'm doing in my uniform data fingerprint proposal. And there what I'm using is content type. The one caveat is that anything that, for this to actually work, this is something that has to be an IETF-wide thing at the minimum.
Yep.
Now, I think there's almost zero chance that content types are going to be accidentally misused by other working groups. But obviously, any protocol that allows arbitrary strings to be signed is going to die, but is going to be vulnerable. But content types looks like a pretty good bet, and you can always extend them, so you can have OpenPGP, application/OpenPGP, and you can then have different twiddles for different contexts.
Yep. Great.
Now separately, I've been working on this project, the mathematical mesh, and I've now got S-MIME usability. Basically, the users now can do S-MIME. It's no hassle at all. Now, the reason I did S-MIME was I knew that if I did PGP, nobody was going to help me with S-MIME. If I did S-MIME, then PGP people might help me make PGP easy to use at the same time.
So there's a call for collaborators?
Yes. In particular, one of the changes since Phil Zimmerman created PGP is that at the time, public key crypto was really expensive in terms of cycles. Now it isn't. And so that has consequences for how you manage keys and how you might want to structure them. And I want to know if there are ways of doing it within the deployed PGP base, or whether I should go with that outside and whatever. In my scheme, I have separate keys for every device wherever possible.
Okay, so that sounds similar. I mean, Derek Atkins' work appears to be moving towards PGP keys per device as well, if you look at those frames. So maybe Derek will be somebody to talk to?
Yeah.
Okay. So do people have other questions or concerns? I think I can give you back 35 minutes of your life. I hope people will follow up on the mailing list. We need to be more active than we have been there, and hopefully we can get some patches flowing and get the draft underway. But thanks for coming, everybody. Anyone else want to speak from via Meet Echo? I'm still not seeing anybody in the queue. We're about to wrap this up. So, okay. I didn't even get to push the red button. Oh, all the more of a shame.
So what's the precise concern about having multiple fingerprints point to the same keys?
It seems deeply weird that I can revoke a key and then have the same key material be usable some other time.
Okay, that is a fair. No, it might be that. Oh, hang on a sec! Don't go! Don't go!
Pac-Man ate it.
Okay, so right. Well, there actually you might have. I'll have to think through because one of the things that actually happens a lot in the web PKI is somebody screws up, they get their company name wrong,
right,
in their certificate.
You mean like OpenPTI instead of OpenITP?
Well, it tends to be things like limited and PTY.